Hey, so we'll be running through how to set up Git and GitHub. So let's dive straight in. Git is essentially a language that you can use for version control, and GitHub is essentially a online repository that you can then save your data to so you have a backup. Kind of like Google Cloud or something like that, Google Drive. Git essentially allows you to keep revisions of your different code, so you don't need to save a file as version 1, version 2, version 3. You can use Git to do this. It's really useful and would definitely recommend learning it because if you're ever collaborating with people, it's the best way to share information. Further, I guess all sort of employers, when they're looking at data scientists or bioinformaticians or any sort of engineer, it's a must to know the skills to use Git. It's also good practice and helps with assignments. So I'll let you guys do this on your own, but basically just go to the different links and download and install Git for your computer. You can also use a GUI for Git, but I personally prefer to communicate using the command line because I find it quicker. But that's personal preference. So yeah, just go on and also create an account on GitHub because that's what I'll be showing you how to save your code to. You can also use other things like GitLab, which we'll use in the bioinformatics course. But it's really par for parcel. So yeah, once you come back, we'll continue on. So I'm going to assume you've come back, and the first thing we'll do is to set up our keys to be able to communicate with the remote. So this isn't Git specific. You can use this, for example, if you're connecting to a remote server or something like that. So you may already have SSH keys already created. But SSH keys are essentially a unique pass phrase essentially that your computer has that you can tell a remote computer or GitHub that you're okay. So it saves you from having to put in your password and username each time. So you just type in SSH -keygen -t RSA. I'm not going to do this because I've already created one. So you can set a passphrase if you want for this or a passcode. I don't usually bother. I just click enter and skip through that. But once you've done that, you can cat, which will just print out your keygen file. So you want to make sure you're doing your public key, not your private key, because that would be bad. So your IDRSA is private, whereas your public is public. So if I now copy this, I can now give this to a server or something, and it'll know that I think that I'm cool with this particular computer communicating with you. So we'll go now onto your GitHub account that you've hopefully all set up, and you just click the tab and go to your settings. Once you're in your settings, you want to scroll down and go to your SSH and GPG keys. Click on that, again scroll down, and just go new SSH key. So I don't need to do this because I've already got one, but basically just give it a label and then paste that information into there. It's as easy as that. Now you can communicate to GitHub without having to type in your password each time, which is very useful. Some other useful things that you might want to do is just set your username, your GitHub name, Git name. So basically each time you make a commit, it's going to say that this commit was created by whatever the global username is, if it's on your own computer. There's a number of other parameters that you can set, but etc. So just configure your username and your email that you want to tell Git that you're communicating with essentially. There's lots of other cool things that you can do to configure your local user account. But we'll dive straight into creating a repository. You can create a repository locally by typing git init. You can clone, which means make a copy of a repository, or you can fork, which essentially, the way I like to think of forking is you want to basically keep track of the remote as well as your own. So I usually just do clone. If you do the git init, you'll need to set your upstream, but probably a lot of words that you don't need to really know at the moment, but I just put them out there because maybe they'll spark something when you're doing it later on. But we're going to go for the most simple way to start off with, and all that we're going to do is we're going to go back to my dashboard and go to your repositories, click new, and we're going to make a repository name. I'm just going to call it vid example. I'm not going to give it a description. I'm going to click private. I'm going to add a readme, a gitignore. So a gitignore basically says, these are the files that I don't want you to track. This is super useful, for example, if you have data in a folder and you don't want to accidentally commit it to GitHub, or files which have passwords in it, etc. You want to make sure you add those to your gitignore. And I will just create this repository. So now what I want to do is I'm going to clone this code onto my computer. Since we've got our SSH keys in there, we can use this one. Otherwise, you'd have to use the HTTPS. But we'll use the SSH one because that's easier. So I'm going to go into my documents folder. I've got a code folder, and I'm going to go git clone, whoops, and then paste that in, and it'll clone into a folder called vid example. So now I can go cd into vid example, ls, and it's got the readme, and it also shows me that I'm on a GitHub branch. Yours might not say that depending on how you've configured your terminal. So I'm just going to show you a couple of simple ways that we can commit and save our code. So cloning, think of that as pulling down from a repository. So I don't know what the equivalent would be in Dropbox or Google Drive, but adding would just be basically saving it to Google Drive. So we're going to make a simple file first. So let's touch new Python file, or let's call it Python example.py. We're going to add some code to that. Print cats. We're going to save that, so I clicked I to insert text, and now I'm going colon WQ to quit. Now, GitHub doesn't know about this file yet, so if we type git status, what we can see is that we've got some untracked files, and they come up in red, Python example. So we're going to change that by saying git add Python example.py. Now if we type git status, what we can see is that we're on branch main, and we have a new file, Python example. So we're going to commit that. So committing is just saving. I don't know why they use commit, but type git commit Python example.py. So every time you commit or save, you need to write a message to say why you're saving this. So why right now do you want to save? And I'm going to say, so I'm going to click I to insert text, added example code, and then escape colon WQ to exit. Now what you can see is that I've got one file change, one insertion, and I've edited Python example. Let's also change readme a little bit. I'm going to say this is in Markdown, so I'm going to say this is an example file for my video. Again, WQ, and I'm going to go git commit readme, updated readme. Okay, let's actually add this into our remote. So as you can see, all that we've got is the original readme on our git remote. So what we want to do is we want to go git push origin main, and that'll push the current commits that we have up to the remote. So think of pushing as upload my saved changes. If we then update our remote repository, what we can see is that 3 seconds ago, we added an example file. We did that. And we now have a Python example file. And it has print cats in it. So it's as simple as that. Some things to keep in mind is if you add an entire folder, it's going to add every file in that. So for example, if this was public and I accidentally did git add on, for example, my documents folder, it'd add all my documents. And then if I accidentally push that, it'd push that all to the remote repository. So you don't want to do that. So just be careful about what you're adding to GitHub and adding to your Git, because you don't want to track and save everything. So that was just the basic stuff that you need to know to do generic GitHub things and Git commands on your computer. So just to reiterate, you've got git add, which is adding a file to be tracked, git commit, which is saving changes, and git push origin. So that's the basically save the code that I've got onto the remote. So basically push all my stuff onto the cloud so that I can have a second copy of it and view it online. There are lots of other things you can do with Git. For example, you can make branches, you can do all sorts of other things, but I won't go into that. Feel free to watch other videos online. This should just set you up to be able to start using GitHub and Git on your computer. So up next, I'll show you how to run a project in PyCharm and how we can add some different things to our Conda environment and then make some changes and save it using Git. So what we will be doing is basically putting everything that we've learned together. So I'll see you in that one if you're still staying tuned.